You're listening to Innovators, the podcast from Harris Search Associates, where we speak with global leaders in education, research, engineering, and the health sciences, and ask them to share lessons learned as they continue to advance the frontiers of innovation and discovery. Today's podcast will be led by Rick Skinner, Senior Consultant.
A recent article in the journal Women in Higher Education that was written and edited by Dr. Kelly Baker begins with a title that surely captures our attention, A World Not Made for Us. And it goes on to note that the conditions that make academia perhaps ill-suited for women are, for some, hard to discern. Because, as Dr. Baker cites, it's always been this way. A patriarchal world isn't immediately obvious because it's so normal. We encounter it every day. Men appear as the standard human being. Everything is catered toward them, made for them, and designed with them in mind. That notwithstanding, there are universities and colleges where the world not made for women permits the exception that perhaps confirms the rule, and are led mostly by women. And one such place is Northern Illinois University. The university's president, Lisa Freeman, Provost, Beth, Ingram, and Chief Financial Officer, Sarah McGill, are women. And we are fortunate to have all three of them with us together for this Innovators podcast. Lisa Freeman became president of Northern Illinois in 2018 after serving as interim president. And prior to those roles, she was interim and then provost in full at NIU. Before undertaking those duties, she was vice president for research and graduate studies. She also spent 16 years at Kansas State University. President Freeman earned her undergraduate and doctor of veterinary medicine degrees from Cornell and her PhD from Ohio State. Beth Ingram was named provost at NIU this year after serving as provost at North Dakota State University and spending 26 years in a variety of roles, from department chair in economics to dean at the University of Iowa. She began her career at Cornell following completion of the doctorate at the University of Minnesota, then returned to Iowa where she earned her undergraduate degree. Sarah McGill is vice president and CFO at Northern Illinois and has been at that position since 2018. Previously, she was senior associate dean in the graduate school at Northwestern University. And before that appointment, she was at the University of Chicago, where she served as executive director of enrollment and chief of staff to the vice president for administration and finance. Ms. McGill earned the MBA from Cardinal Stritch University and a Bachelor of Science from Marquette University. I want to start with a question that I think is kind of uppermost on our minds in our thinking. How early in your professional career did you take on a position of some responsibility beyond that for your own work and performance? Did you seek out the position, and did you have someone who, maybe only now in hindsight, at the time, served as a mentor for you? And who was that person to you? A personal friend, a relative, or a professional colleague? And how much did his mentoring have significant impact on you and your subsequent career? Let's begin with President Freeman, then Ms. McGill, and then Beth.
My first administrative experience grew out of the joy that I experienced from my own career choice, which combined veterinary medicine with basic biomedical research. I loved what I was doing, and I wanted other veterinary students to see that opportunity. With support from my department head and dean at Kansas State's College of Veterinary Medicine, I created and ran a summer research program for veterinary students. I managed to procure funding from the National Institutes of Health, the animal health industry, and philanthropy, and my success was noted by the then provost, who was also a veterinarian. He encouraged me to learn more about higher education outside of veterinary medicine through participation in the fellowship program sponsored by the American Council on Education, the ACE Fellowship. And in that context, I pursued an interest in research administration and became mentored by the vice presidents for research at both Kansas State University and the University at Bethel, Buffalo, who hosted my ACE Fellowship. My most significant mentors and sponsors were all men, all five of them.
Is that a function perhaps of the lack of women, or was it simply those 5 individuals had the chance to work with you and they happened to be men?
I don't think that there were a lot of people who looked like me who could have mentored me. I
Mm-hmm.
was very grateful that the department head, dean, and the vice presidents for research saw my potential and helped me get where I am. I
Mm-hmm.
learned a lot about how to help others succeed from them. And I also learned from them something that stays with me today, that leadership is more about cultivating the best in others than convincing others that you're the smartest person in the room.
Miss McGill?
So my experience is a little bit different. After I graduated college, I took a role as an administrative assistant, and I worked for a chief HR officer in a medical college.
Mm-hmm.
She was full of grit and fire, and really in working with her, I learned to see past some of the boundaries I had put on my own life or my own career trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
She encouraged me to see beyond my role and put me in positions where I was leading initiatives, even though I had a title that one wouldn't assume would come with leadership responsibility. That was a tremendous learning experience. I learned to lead with influence. Under her guidance, her sometimes cajoling, I realized that being a leader is much more than having a title. It requires the ability to build relationships, to listen, and to get others to see possibilities. These are the skills that influence who I am today.
Mm-hmm.
And those early days, early years were very transformative for me. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited to serve at NIU. It's the ability to transform the lives of the students we serve. The 3 of us, we have an amazing opportunity to impact change. And as we align our goals, we will help to transform young student lives and make the university stronger.
Ms. McGill, could I just ask, the person who played that important role, was she sort of a precedent breaker? Was she someone who was able to overcome what may have been, I don't know, but may have been the all too typical inhibitions on the part of women being in leadership positions?
Oh, I think so. You know, I grew up in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
She was an African-American woman from the East Coast working in the Midwest. And in working for her, I saw someone who in a profile that wasn't typically seen. And I had the ability to learn from her. And I admired her greatly for the conversations she had every day, for how she built her team, how she provided us opportunities, and how she held herself with grace and dignity. And I think that really, when you're early in your career and you don't know what you don't know, it really helps to open your mind to possibilities and really think, well, if she can do it and she doesn't have any excuses, what's my excuse? So I really go back to those were 4 years of my life. And I really have to say those 4 years really changed the trajectory and put me on the path that allowed me to come to Northern today.
I could almost, we could take up the rest of this interview talking about the idea of an African-American woman being placed in a leadership position and then being clear that she wished to advance others. So hold on to that thought. We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Dr. Ingram, how did you get started in this world?
Well, my path is pretty traditional. I started out as an assistant professor, associate full, and then my home department, economics, had a rotating chair position. And so at some point after I became full, it was my turn to take over that position in the economics department. And I was at that time, I think the only woman in the department. And so there was some concern on the part of some of my colleagues about having a female chair. But the dean of the college thought that I was the right fit at that point in time and encouraged me to take the position. And he later helped me to move into the dean's office as well, into a higher level leadership position. You know, I'd say the 2 people that I might think of as mentors really didn't do a whole lot of mentoring, but I learned a lot by watching how they led and how they managed their teams. And I'd say that both positively and negatively, and both were men, by the way.
Just to follow up on that, the situation of a sort of rotation, it's your turn in the barrel, as they sometimes call it. The comments that, or the concerns, were they ever expressed to you directly?
Yes. Email, by, in person.
Sure.
Yeah. We're not sure you're up to the job.
I think we'll need to revisit that one too, because it sounds extraordinarily important. When we were preparing for this interview, you conveyed to me your appreciation for the importance of communication in every one of your positions. And I don't know that anybody would question the importance of leadership, of communication and leadership. But are there considerations having to do with women, being women in these roles, if you will, up the ante on effective communication? Is more expected of you in part because of your gender? And let's start with you, Sarah.
Oh, I feel that's a little bit of a leading question because I think the assumption is yes. The fact that there is a trio of women leaders, it does up the ante. But I would say that it's not who we are or our genders. It's the roles that we hold, and it's the commitment to this institution and the work we do. I mean, that's what ups the ante.
Okay.
Just thinking about where we are at our university, I have witnessed firsthand a new sense of energy on campus since Dr. Freeman was appointed president. People are excited about her vision and the direction she's leading the university. She's making investments in faculty and students and staff and in the community. It's because of that we have a responsibility to really be thoughtful and deliberate with our communication. In higher ed, these institutions are here before us. They're going to be here after us. And for a short amount of time, we have the ability to make it better. For all of us, that is what ups the ante.
Going back to Beth's point earlier, I assumed that if some of her colleagues who had concerns about her becoming department chair, I'm only imagining what they may have said about Lisa becoming a president, but we'll save that for later. So, Beth, could you talk to us about not just the importance of communication, but sort of the expectation that by virtue of your gender, somehow there's a even more of an expectation?
So I want to turn to a little story that happened a few days ago, but I've spent most of my life in rooms with men, and that's become less so, over the 30 years I've been in higher ed, but I grew up in a male-dominated department. And a few days ago, Lisa had convened a meeting, a small group, it's her leadership team, and we were talking about some issue, and I interrupted one of the men in the room, and I immediately apologized, but Lisa turned to me and said, that just reflects years of conditioning in a male-dominated field in which you weren't heard unless you jumped in. That acknowledgement just much to me because nobody's ever said that to me before. And so it made me realize that, she recognizes that what you bring to the table is determined by how your experiences before you got there. So, the thing I think about is that because of that experience, I try to make sure that people participate in the meetings that I'm in, that I make sure everybody has a chance to share their ideas and thoughts. And then I try to reiterate what I'm hearing so people know that I'm listening to them, which is out of my experience of not feeling that way in a lot of meetings that I had been in. So I'd say that's how my lived experience affects how I communicate on campus.
That's important. President Freeman, before I actually turn it to you to hear your response, I'm reminded that at this point in time, women are precisely 30% of university and college presidents in the United States. Yet women make up the majority of students now, make up the majority of graduates and the like. But I'm curious, is there some sort of expectation of you by virtue of the path you've taken at Northern Illinois? People have expectations that you're going to communicate more or differently or whichever the case might be.
For me, the ability to communicate effectively with different groups has been my path to social and professional acceptance. The leadership positions that I've held have required me to navigate different cultures within the university and often to serve as a translator between different communities, academia and industry, humanities and sciences, student affairs, and academic affairs. And I think I'm good at bridging communities, translating jargon, and an effective communicator because my mother emphasized to me from a very early age that it was really important for a woman to be able to engage in social conversation with people who have different interests and backgrounds. And she told me this because it was important for me to be able to support my future husband's career advancement.
That is that's a fascinating comment from your mother. Just out of curiosity, did your mother have a professional career?
Actually, my mother did. My mother was a teacher. She worked from the time that I was little, but my mother was the only mother in our neighborhood who worked. And I think the neighbors and our family, outside our immediate family, people made her feel less than because her husband wasn't the sole support for the family. And she wasn't saying that I couldn't have a career, but she wanted me never to feel the scorn of others that she experienced.
Fascinating. In talking with you about today's interview, I'm curious as to whether you have ideas about how others view you. And let me be clear here, not just expectations of you individually, but you are a unique trio. There are almost no other institutions where women occupy, reasonably speaking, the three most significant positions at a university. And so I'm kind of curious, do you think others see you as role models? Do they put you on up above and something to aspire to? And what does that do to you? Or, and just to make it a little more complicated, do you think the various people with whom you interact in something more than a single encounter, in other words, people you engage fairly regularly, have expectations of you as a woman and as a member of a trio of women leaders that are different than the expectations they would have of a man in a leadership role and men as a team of leaders? Ms. McGill?
Oh, there is a lot in that question.
We try to load up everything.
Yeah, well, you succeeded.
Perfect.
So I think everybody has expectations or come in with perceptions of who we are dealing with, who we expect to deal with. And I think the fact that we are three women, that definitely influences what people may expect from the three of us. I know for me personally that at times when I walk into the room, there are people looking over my shoulder for perhaps the man who would hold the role. That's not lost on me. I'm also mindful, much like with my boss that I had mentioned previously.
Yes.
There are interactions that I have with people every day, that we have with people every day, that we may not think of as significant, but we're not aware of how those interactions affect others. So with that in mind, I work to be authentic, to be honest, and these are the qualities that drive my interactions and help to keep me focused on the people I work with, the work that we're doing, separate from perhaps the perceptions or the expectations that others may have.
Dr. Ingram, you comment on this because, I mean, you occupy a role where you interact with faculty, and the faculty has begun to change in more dramatic ways, albeit not in economics. They still don't have many women in economics. But for you, do you think there are expectations, and are you aware of those expectations?
So yeah, that's certainly true. There are expectations of how I'm going to behave and how I'm going to communicate and how I'm going to carry myself on campus. I've been here since May, and so it's a little hard for me to distinguish the culture at NIU from the overall culture towards a female provost. One of the things that attracted me to NIU was the openness and commitment to diversity and inclusion that I felt on campus when I visited, and I found in spades once I got here. And so there's an openness and reception to people who have come from different leadership, have had different pathways to leadership here that I don't know if you find that everywhere. So I think the campus is receptive to having a trio of women. One thing I would say is that Sarah and I have been out visiting groups on campus, academic departments, and visiting with the faculty. And the fact that the two of us visit together and that we're both female, I think does change the way the conversation happens. The faculty have been very open with us. They've been willing to share good things and concerns that they have on campus. Even the fact that there are 3 women at the top of the university has been noted positively in a couple of those conversations. I think this is the leadership team that the campus wanted at this point in time. And I don't know that it's related to being female, but I think that the campus wanted a team that was transparent and open, with a strong ethical compass and a willingness to be creative and innovative. And so that's what was important to them, and that's what I feel when we visit with people around campus.
The university has had to undergo some significant budget challenges. And the fact that you and Ms. McGill show up together, I have to say that probably speaks volume, regardless of gender. Just the fact that the academic vice president and the CFO come together to talk and to probably listen more than talk. That in itself is unusual in my experience. So I don't think that's necessarily a gender characteristic, but it does strike me as something that you don't see every day. Dr. Freeman?
I guess what I'd like to add is, I don't lead with the thought that I'm a woman leader any more than I think Sarah or Beth does. But I'm NIU's 13th president and NIU's first woman president. And by virtue of that position and fact, I am a role model. And it's certainly a privilege to help others see that they can succeed. And when I'm asked about being the first woman president, I always say I'm proud to be the first, and I know I won't be the last.
There you go.
With respect to others' expectations of us, I think when people encounter the 3 of us as the leadership team, over time we have surprised and impressed some of our colleagues with our confidence and our decisiveness. As individuals and as a team, Sarah, Beth, and I tend to be analytical. We ask questions before we make a decision. And if you don't know us well, this can be misinterpreted as hesitancy. Also, all 3 of us value collaboration. And I think initially some of our colleagues mistook our desire to collaborate for a lack of confidence or an inability to decide. But I think we've disabused them of those misconceptions, and they are impressed with our confidence and decisiveness.
It's interesting because by virtue of you 3 being in those positions, you are a change in and of itself. And so as you suggested, you automatically become a role model without even trying. But the point you made about the willingness to listen and to, rather than promote an agenda per se, other than an agenda of transparency and open communication, that does suggest that you bring to it something that is not always present in much of the decision making. That leads me to this whole question of change. Gandhi is credited with saying, be the change you want to see in the world. You just made me realize you are change. You have been changed. But at this time in history, we're going through a period where people, both within the academy and outside, are asking, and in some cases demanding, higher education to change so that they can avoid being what those beautiful chapels in Florence became. As church attendance dropped off over the centuries, those chapels became wonderful places to have acoustical and vocal music, but there was very few people there who were worshiping. And so there are those who maintain that higher education is not too far away from a situation like that, where unless change takes place, higher education could very well lose its standing and its role. Are you then, as women in leadership roles at a university, the change you want to see? Are you affecting changes in a direction that you know will not simply continue the institution, but will in fact change the institution in profound ways? And is the fact that all 3 of you are women, and therefore in itself there are a set of expectations, does that mean you're more likely to be successful at change? Let's start with the president.
I think the 3 of of us were hired into our leadership roles not because we're women,
Mm-hmm.
but because the Board of Trustees, the faculty, staff, and our students felt that we'd be able to lead change and move the university forward while also remaining true to NIU's mission and core values.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're doing that, and we're enjoying the journey.
Beth, do you have a thought on this?
Yeah, let me play off what Lisa just said. And something you said to me a long time ago, that universities move forward when they have the right team in place at the right time.
Yep.
Universities don't change because you've got a leadership change. You've got to have the people with the background and skills that are needed at that point in the university's trajectory. And, as a woman, I have different experiences than my male counterparts. My colleagues of color have different experiences than I have, and Lisa and I come from different disciplinary backgrounds, and we're stronger because we see the world differently and we can approach questions differently, and that's a strength. NIU's mission, vision, and values is predicated on celebrating those differences. And if I can throw in an aside, we had dinner last night for new faculty on campus, and 95% of the new faculty showed up at this dinner, and I'd say every single one of them talked about NIU's mission, vision, and values as a reason they came to this campus. I think that's how you enact change and move an institution forward.
Sarah, you've been at two private institutions, which gives them some latitude in one respect, in that they're not having to contend with state government and the like. Do you see your role and the role of you as leadership as a group, or are you likely to be able to affect change?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going to echo something both Lisa and Beth said. This work is personal for us. We believe in the vision, mission, and values of NIU. And the experiences that we have, the different stories, our journeys to get here, we value those things in one another. And I believe that's what makes us stronger as a leadership team. It's so much of what NIU is based on, diverse experiences and trajectories, and how we come together to persevere and to succeed. It's what motivates us to be here and to stay focused on the positive impact that we're going to have in this moment. I think, quite frankly, for all of us, failure is not an option.
We're out of time, but we always try to leave time for our guests to offer us and our listeners one or two things that they would want for people to walk away from listening to this aware of. Beth, if there is something that you would like our audience to be clear about and in understanding what's going on there and what you're able to do, what would those one or two things be?
I guess one would be, don't listen to the naysayers. Be persistent. Don't be afraid to ask questions and interrogate the conventional wisdom. Be curious and ask. That's what happens at a university, and the more questions you ask, the better the solution that you come up with is going to be.
Sarah?
I would encourage everyone to find something that is important to them, to him or her, and pursue it unapologetically. To surround yourself with people that may be different from you, may be smarter than you, and listen and learn. And as you're taking part in that journey, be true to yourself and try to have a little fun along the way.
Lisa, I'm sure already you've had opportunities to talk to the women who have occupied university presidencies. And if you were to leave some advice to someone who is at least entertaining the idea of pursuing a similar path, what would you want them to know from today's conversation?
I guess my favorite piece of advice to offer women who are trying to ascend in leadership positions, academic or otherwise, is don't wait to be asked for your opinion. When you have something to offer, invite yourself into the conversation and share your ideas.
Very open. Was it Margaret Mead who said that in order to change the world, it only takes a small group of people to do that, and that's the way changes happen? I do know that the unique set of circumstances, not driven by saying we want women to occupy leadership roles, but by the fact that the three of you, by virtue of what you've done, what you've experienced, and who you are, all came together. But it's fascinating to me that to consider how the experiences you've had as women, as well as the experiences you've had professionally, could in fact provide you that opportunity to make the kinds of changes that can ensure that the education at Northern Illinois University is what it should be. Thank you all very, very much for your time, and we're very pleased and very happy to have had you on Innovators.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Innovators, a production of Harris Search Associates. We'll have more insightful conversations with global thought leaders to follow.